The cardboard at my back was tattered from 3 months of bearing the weight of my tired body, soaked through the nights of rain that seeped through the sunroof of my old Toyota Corolla. I pressed my hand against the cold glass, watching my breath form opaque rings, melting into the darkness. Outside, streetlights cast long streaks of light across the deserted parking lot behind an abandoned convenience store in Michigan, where I'd taken refuge since October. My daughter Sarah's voice echoed in my mind like the lingering echo of a recent phone call. "Mom, please stay in the car a little longer. I'm busy preparing for the baby. You understand, right?" I understood, more than Sarah could have imagined. The flood had swept everything away: the little house on Cedar Lane, the old photo frames, the ceramic dishes my mother had cherished, and 40 years of memories I'd worked so hard to preserve. Insurance only covered the frame, but it can't replace the life that was lived inside it. At 62, all I have left is my 12-year-old Toyota Corolla and a few dirty clothes salvaged from the muddy wreckage. At first, Sarah was sympathetic. "Stay with us, Mom, until you feel better," she'd said, her eyes shining with sincerity. But the temporary quickly became a tangible burden. Her husband, Tom, began leaving notes on the fridge, implying utility bills and living expenses, in language as cold as a statement of accounts. The morning I decided to pack up the Toyota, Sarah was busy feeding cereal to my 18-month-old niece, Lily. She didn't look up when I said I was leaving for a while. "Maybe it's for the best," she said quietly, wiping the applesauce from Lily's chin. Tom was stressed about his promotion. Mom knew him. Oh, I knew how Tom was when he was stressed. He became bitter, narrow-minded, and had no qualms about forcing me into the role of a freeloader in the very house I had thought would be a temporary shelter to start over. Huddled in the back seat of the Toyota Corolla, I pulled my worn winter coat over me in place of a blanket and wondered if this was what my mother had felt in her later years: a pale shadow, a quiet annoyance, easily pushed out of the orbit of love when intimacy became too much to bear. The phone vibrated against my chest. A text from Sarah. "Hope you're okay. Tom just got a promotion. We're looking at some bigger houses. Baby number 2 is due in the spring." I stared at the screen, the words searing into my mind until the light went out, leaving an invisible darkness at the bottom of my heart. I put the phone away, not replying. Sarah hoped I was okay. Okay sleeping in the car in the bitter cold of a Michigan December, while she was busy celebrating Tom's promotion, eagerly searching for her dream house, and preparing for the arrival of an unborn child. The next morning, as if by habit, I drove to the town's public library, stopping in my usual spot near the back entrance. The librarian, Clara Bennett, a gentle, measured woman, had stopped questioning my quiet presence a few weeks ago. She simply nodded as I passed the reception desk, then quietly went about her business. I walked straight to the computer tower in the corner and sat down, spending hours browsing job sites, researching social assistance programs, and picking up the pieces of my life that the flood had washed away. Each click was a fragile bridge forward, a quiet hope to hold on to something that had once been mine. Though sometimes I couldn't help but wonder if I was trying to patch together a dream that was rotten at its roots, deceiving myself about a future that was not yet real. On a seemingly ordinary Tuesday morning at the Michigan Public Library, I opened my email inbox and found an email that made the world stop. "Dear Margaret Thompson." The first line appeared, and I had to squint and read the sender twice to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. "Edward Larson and Associates, an estate law firm." My heart pounded as I scrolled down. "We represent the estate of Eleanor Caldwell, your aunt. We have tried several times to contact you to discuss her will. Please contact us as soon as possible to resolve any issues related to your inheritance." I sat motionless in my hard plastic chair, staring at the computer screen as if afraid that if I blinked, the words would vanish into thin air. My mother's sister, Aunt Nora, had left Michigan in the 1980s for Santa Barbara and had gradually disappeared from family gatherings, letters, and Christmas cards. I had assumed she had passed away, quietly fading into oblivion amid the myriad of connections that had faded with time. Yet somehow, she still remembered me. The call to the lawyer's office felt as if I were speaking from a parallel universe. Yes, that's right, the lawyer confirmed in a calm, coldly professional voice. Mrs. Eleanor Caldwell had left her entire estate to you, a house in Santa Barbara, investment accounts, and a life insurance policy. The numbers he quoted made my hands shake uncontrollably. The house was appraised at $900,000. After necessary expenses, the remaining liquid assets were about $350,000. There were some minor debts to settle, but the total net worth was now over $1 million, Mrs. Thompson. I hung up, sitting silently in the warm room that now seemed to float. Around me, the library was still operating at its usual pace. Students were typing away at their keyboards to compose essays. Old people were leisurely flipping through the morning newspaper, and children were laughing and playing in the children's book corner. Ordinary people, living ordinary lives, were completely unaware that the homeless woman quietly in the corner had just received a fateful gift, an unexpected fortune. The drive back to the abandoned convenience store in Michigan felt like a dream. The feeling of unreality clung to me the entire way, as if I would wake up in the back seat of an old Toyota Corolla with another turn and realize that everything had been a product of exhaustion and the December chill that had seeped through my skin. But Attorney James Carter's business card was still tucked into my jacket pocket, and the follow-up email from his office was still on my phone screen as living proof. I briefly considered calling Sarah to share the news of the unexpected inheritance, imagining her expression shifting from distant politeness to shocked joy. But then something held me back, like an invisible hand gently touching my shoulder. Maybe it was the memory of the notes Tom had taped to the refrigerator, filled with numbers and vague reminders about utility bills. Perhaps it was the way Sarah had viewed my wanderings as a minor inconvenience, a blip in her priorities, not worth dwelling on for too long. Or perhaps, deep in her chest, a festering anger had been growing, a silent seed that had been nurtured by long nights spent huddled in a cold car, while my daughter lay comfortably in her warm bed, busy building a family that was growing and had no room for me. Instead of calling Sarah, I drove to a small motel in suburban Michigan, where I paid cash for a room. My first time in months in a real bed. I let the hot shower run for so long that the room was filled with steam, even fogging the mirror opposite. In the fogged mirror, I saw a woman I barely recognized. Thinner, her cheeks hollow, her eyes hardened by hopeless waiting. But something sparkled in her gaze. A fragile light I'd thought had gone out long ago. A glimmer of hope, a glimpse of the Maggie Thompson I'd once been, before Tom's mean notes or Sarah's hurried mornings had left me exhausted. That night, I sat in the quiet room, using the motel's Wi-Fi to look up the house in Santa Barbara. The pictures came up. An old wooden house with a wide porch and a few old lemon trees in the backyard. In need of repair, perhaps, but it had a warm, rustic feel. A home, a place that truly belonged to me. My phone buzzed. A text from Sarah. "I haven't heard from Mom in days. Are you okay?" I typed and deleted a dozen replies. Part of me wanted to tell her all about the inheritance, to reassure her that I wasn't as useless as she thought. But most of me wanted to keep it to myself, to see what the days ahead would reveal. In the end, I just texted back, "Mom's fine, looking into things." The next morning, I booked a flight to Santa Barbara. Attorney James Carter would meet me at the house to explain the details of Aunt Nora's estate. I used the last of my savings, which had been used as a down payment on an apartment that never materialized, to buy the tickets. Everything I owned still fit into 2 shopping bags. Looking at them, I thought of the woman I'd been 3 months ago, the one who'd lost everything in the flood, the one who'd reluctantly relied on her daughter's conditional kindness, believing she had no other choice. That woman is no more. In her place is a tougher Maggie who is beginning to understand that love can come with strings attached, and that sometimes family is just a temporary concept. I realize the people who say they love you the most can also be the ones who withdraw the fastest when your presence starts to become a burden they don't want to carry. I placed my room key on the wooden table beside the bed and stepped outside into the dim light of a Michigan December morning. The Toyota Corolla started smoothly at the first turn, as if it sensed something too, a beginning, a more worthy destination. But instead of driving straight to the airport, I turned into Sarah's neighborhood. The modest, pitched roof house sat quietly on a quiet street, with Tom's truck parked in the driveway and Lily's colorful plastic toys scattered on the dew-dark lawn. It had been my home for 6 short weeks before I'd been told to leave with gentle, polite, but icy words. I parked across the street, letting the engine idle, looking out the closed windows, searching for any sign of life. Part of me wanted to go out, knock on the door, tell Sarah about the unexpected inheritance, to see if the news would wake up the girl who called me every weekend just to check in. But the past 3 months, the long nights in the car, and the quiet hours at the library had taught me something valuable. Self-esteem, once eroded, is hard to regain. I'd also learned that sometimes the people who hurt you the most are the ones who hide it behind smiles, plausible excuses, and affection wrapped in indifferent politeness. I stepped on the gas and pulled away. In the rearview mirror, Sarah's house shrank, then disappeared. Ahead of me, Santa Barbara awaited, an unfamiliar land that offered the chance to explore who I could become without the emotional baggage of those who considered me a burden. I could feel the transformation beginning in the uprightness of my posture, in the sureness of my hands on the wheel. I was no longer the woman who had slept in the car because her daughter was too busy to care. When I touched down at the Santa Barbara airport, the golden California sun embraced me like a gentle touch of forgiveness. For the past 3 months, I had lived under the gray skies of Michigan winter, huddled in empty parking lots and the cold shadows of crumbling buildings. But here, even in mid-December, the air felt as gentle as spring, carrying the promise of a new beginning, not because of someone's pity, but because of my own choice. Edward Larson and Associates had arranged a car to take me from the Santa Barbara airport straight to my new home. The driver, Carlos Rivera, was a middle-aged man with a worldly air and a friendly smile, the thick accent of someone who had spent his entire life in this coastal area. "First time in Santa Barbara?" he asked, his eyes focused on the road, but his voice open. "First time in over 40 years," I replied, my eyes following the palm trees that swept past the window like dashes against the clear sky. "So, what brings you back?" "An inheritance." The words still stuck in my throat, as if they were about someone else. "From an aunt I barely remember." Carlos glanced at me in the rearview mirror, his gaze quiet and penetrating. "Families are weird, aren't they? Some people you thought you'd be with forever disappoint you. Then some people you thought you'd forgotten suddenly change the rest of your life." I remembered Sarah's text messages, cheerful stories about baby stuff and mortgages, sent to a mother huddled in a freezing parking lot. "Yeah," I said quietly. "That's weird." The house on Oakwood Drive was much nicer than the legal documents suggested. A 1920s wooden bungalow with original oak floors and carved built-in bookshelves. It sat on a quiet corner, sheltered by ancient pines, with a large porch that opened on both sides, welcoming. Though the paint was peeling and some repairs were needed, the house felt sturdy, built to last. Attorney James Carter waited for me at the front gate. He was a slight man, neatly dressed in an expensive suit, and seemed a little puzzled that I had stepped out of a service car instead of a luxury car. "Mrs. Thompson," he said, his voice faltering, "I thought I was meeting someone else." I looked down at my worn jeans and thrift store sweater, the best I owned. "Different in what way?" I asked again. "Your Aunt Nora often spoke of you in your later years. She spoke of you as if you were a successful, established woman." I smiled faintly, one hand gripping the gate to steady myself as I gazed at the house that now bore my name. "Nora holds the image of me from 40 years ago," I said. "People change. Life does." Inside the house, every corner tells the story of a woman who lived alone, but was never truly alone. The rooms are filled with books, lush plants, and antiques arranged with the care of someone who treasures every memory. The kitchen, though renovated in the 1990s and now showing the signs of time, still exudes a rare warmth and neatness. Aunt Nora left behind more than a home, but a life of love, quiet but never dull. James Carter, the lawyer, led me through each room, where the scent of old wood mixed with the faint scent of mint. He told me that the neighbors took turns tending the garden and taking the mail. "Mrs. Murray next door has the key," he said. "She's very worried about what will become of this house." In the master bedroom, I came across some old photos on the dressing table. Images of Aunt Nora through the years, bright eyes, radiant smile, despite her age. In most of the photos, she is not alone. A tall, slender woman with silver hair is often seen by her side, dining, traveling, or gardening in the backyard of this very house. "Was Aunt Nora ever married?" I asked quietly. James Carter hesitated, then said softly, "She lived with someone, Dorothy Evans. They were together for 35 years, until Dorothy passed away in 2018. She never got over her loss." I picked up a photo, two women in their 70s, sitting side by side on the porch, hands clasped, eyes filled with affection. The love was evident in every gesture, from the way Nora leaned gently on Dorothy to the gentle touch Dorothy gave her. "Did Dorothy have any relatives?" I asked. "She had a son who lived in Washington, but she hardly ever spoke to him. He was very opposed to Dorothy leaving all her property to her aunt. That hurt Nora a lot." In that moment, I understood why Aunt Nora had chosen me as her heir. Not because of our close relationship, but because we had both experienced a bitter truth. Family is not always defined by blood, and sincere, voluntary love is always more valuable than feelings bound by duty. The legal procedures took hours to sign, with all kinds of documents related to bank accounts, investment portfolios, and insurance policies, all of which seemed to represent a life carefully cultivated and meticulously managed by Aunt Nora. A retired teacher, she lived simply but had a sharp mind and invested wisely. She had owned the house on Oakwood Drive outright for the past 15 years. After taxes and fees, the total liquid assets are about $360,000, James Carter explained. The house is appraised at $920,000 and could sell for even more in the current market. Aunt Nora also left a small life insurance policy, bringing the total estate to more than $1.3 million. The numbers felt like something from a world I never belonged to, like luxury goods in a store I could never dare to enter. But the most tangible reality was the house enveloping me. The warm weight of the keys in my hand, the feeling that for the first time in a long time, I could call a place home. After James Carter left, I walked quietly through each room, slowly letting each wall, each door sink into my memory. In the kitchen, I found a note taped to the refrigerator. "For the neighbor who tended my garden and got my mail. Wine in the cupboard, cookies in the blue tin. Take it." In. I walked next door and knocked. A woman in her 70s, Helen Murray, opened the door, her eyes lighting up when I told her I was Nora's niece. "Oh dear," she said, her voice warm and friendly. Nora always talked about you. Maggie this, Maggie that. She was so proud of you. Helen invited me in, made coffee, and we sat and talked for hours about Aunt Nora. She told me that over the past year she had worried about me, as if she sensed that I was going through a difficult time. She wanted to help, Helen said, but she was afraid to bother her. Nora used to say she was strong, but everyone needed to share, even if only once. I thought of the nights I'd spent huddled in the car in Michigan, counting my pennies, feeling my dignity slipping away with each day of wandering without a place to go. Aunt Nora, who lived thousands of miles away, seemed the only one who could sense my unspoken distress, while Sarah, who lived less than a half-hour's drive away, saw my presence as an annoying burden in her increasingly busy schedule. Helen continued, her voice quieter. 6 months ago, Nora amended her will, adding a line at the end that if she died, I should keep an eye on you. She said, Maggie may not know about the legacy right away, but it will come. And when she does, she'll need a little kindness first. That evening, I stood on the porch of Aunt Nora's house, now my own, in Santa Barbara, and called Sarah, my first since arriving in California. Mom, I'm worried. Where are you? Sarah asked, her voice filled with confusion. California, I said briefly, watching the last streaks of sunlight dye the Santa Barbara sky in long-forgotten oranges and pinks. California? What are you doing there? Did you find a job? Something like that, I said, pausing for a beat. I inherited a house. The silence stretched. Inherited? What do you mean? Aunt Nora died. She left you the house and some money. Aunt Nora? I thought you died a long time ago. How much was the money? It was as I had expected. No question about my loss. No congratulations that I finally had a place to stay. Just how much money? Enough, I replied, trying to keep my voice even. Oh, that's great, Sarah exclaimed, her voice suddenly excited. Tom and I were just talking about getting you settled. Now it's all set. When are you coming home? Home? As if the Toyota Corolla, where I'd slept for 3 months, was home. As if the parking lot behind the abandoned convenience store in Michigan was where I belonged. I'm not sure I'll be back, Sarah. There was a long pause. What are you talking about? And your life in Michigan? Lily missing Grandma? And the baby that's coming? I managed just fine when you slept in the car for 3 months, I interrupted. Mom, that's not fair. We left you there for 6 weeks. Until Tom started to find you annoying, I interrupted again, unable to contain myself. Look, we may not have done everything right, but we're still family. This inheritance is great, but you don't have to run away to California. We can help you find a place close to home. Close enough to home that I could babysit Lily or clean the house when needed, but not close enough that I would be a real concern. I need time to think, I said. What are you thinking? Mom, you're talking nonsense. Go home. We'll figure it out together. But as I looked out at the garden that Aunt Nora and Dorothy had lovingly tended, at the peaceful houses in the neighborhood where people actually cared about each other, I knew that maybe I was home. I'll call you back in a few days, I said, and hung up before Sarah could say anything else. That night, for the first time in months, I slept in a real bed, in Aunt Nora's room, in her quiet house in Santa Barbara. The air around me was filled with the gentle breath of a life well lived. The sheets smelled pleasantly of mint, and through the half-open window I could hear the rustling of lime leaves in the backyard like a quiet lullaby. But sleep did not come easily. The phone buzzed, each text message from Sarah ringing in rapid succession. Call me back, Mom. We need to have a serious talk. Then, Tom thinks you're being reckless. Of course, Tom always had opinions about my legacy, about my decisions, about the whole life he never understood. Tom, who had left me notes complaining about the electric bill when I didn't have a roof over my head. Tom, who Sarah said was busy looking for a bigger house to accommodate a growing family. I turned off my phone and lay in the dark, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of my new neighborhood. In the distance, a train whistle sounded like a whisper from another world. Occasionally, the headlights would sweep past the window, briefly illuminating the silent walls. Tomorrow, I would begin to build a new life, a life of my own choosing. Tomorrow, I would wonder who was worthy of being in it. But tonight, for the first time in months, I felt safe, warm, and truly belonged. Tonight, I was no longer the woman who slept quietly in the car because her daughter was too busy to care. 3 weeks in Santa Barbara have changed me in ways I'm still discovering. My skin is no longer the gray of a Michigan winter or the remnants of cold nights in the car. My shoulders are straightening, no longer hunched as if waiting for a disappointment to strike. When I look at myself in Aunt Nora's antique mirror, I catch a glimpse of the woman I used to be, before the flood, before Tom's notes of blame, before I learned to shrink to fit other people's convenience. Every morning, I start my day with a cup of coffee on the porch, watching Helen Murray tend the garden next door. She'll wave, then tell me stories about the neighborhood, the Garcias' new baby, the Johnsons' newly remodeled kitchen, the Thursday book club meetings at the community center. A normal pace of life, something I'd missed during my days of just trying to survive. The house became mine through small changes every day. I moved out Aunt Nora's favorite mystery novels to make room for a few books I'd saved from the flood. I rearranged the kitchen to accommodate my left-handed cooking habits, drawer by drawer, spoon by spoon. Most importantly, I hung my mother's quilt, the only remaining family memento, on the living room wall where the sunset lit up the faded colors. The phone sat silent for days after I stopped responding to Sarah's increasingly urgent and anxious messages. This morning, as I sipped my coffee on the porch, watching Helen Murray carefully prune the blooming roses in the garden beyond the fence, the phone rang with Sarah's number. "Mom, thank God you're finally answering." Her voice was a shrill cry. "I'm fine, Sarah. I'm just settling in." "Stable? What do you mean? You can't just bolt off to California and think we're not worried." Lily keeps asking where she's gone. Just hearing Lily's name sent a familiar ache through my chest. I remembered her face lighting up, her joy at playing simple games, listening to my bedtime stories. But that love, long ago distorted by Sarah's convenience, the calculated visits, the limited moments so I wouldn't linger too long, expecting nothing more than a temporary role. "How's Lily?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light. "She's fine, but that's not the problem. The problem is that you're running away instead of facing reality." Sarah paused, then said, "Tom and I talked. We think you should go back to Michigan. This California thing is just an escape." Tom and I had talked, as if Tom had a say in my life, as if the man who had made me feel like a stranger in my own daughter's home had any say in my choices. "What are you running away from, Sarah?" I asked, my voice as calm as a lake after a rain. "You can't live in someone's house forever, pretending your old life never happened. You have obligations in Michigan. Your family is there." "Family?" I repeated the word, heavy. "You don't have any family when you're sleeping in your car for 3 months." "Oh, Mom, don't exaggerate. It's just a phase. We're struggling too." "Sarah, you lived in your car for 3 months while I was struggling to buy a new house. You don't have to do that anymore. Things have changed." "Then sell the house, get the money, and go back to where you really belong." Where she belongs. In Sarah's world, I belonged where it was most convenient for her, close enough to babysit Lily or cook dinner, but far enough away to not disrupt the order she'd established. "I like it here," I said, my voice flat. "I don't even know anyone there." "I'm getting to know them. The neighbors are really nice." "Neighbors aren't family," Sarah said firmly. I thought of Helen's morning waves, of the handyman at the hardware store who patiently helped me choose the color of my porch, of the friendly invitations from strangers at the book club. Sometimes, I said, they're more than family. The silence stretched so long I thought Sarah had hung up. Finally, she spoke, her voice a mixture of irritation and disappointment. Okay, if you want to pursue this little adventure, that's up to you. But don't expect us to keep your life in Michigan. Tom got promoted, remember? We're looking for a home, a real home, not some old legacy from an aunt you barely know. Congratulations, Tom, I said, my voice low and not at all the greeting she'd been expecting. We're flying out next weekend, Sarah announced, as if it had been planned all along. My coffee cup froze in midair. What? We found a good deal, she explained, as if this were ridiculously reasonable. Tom has a few days of vacation left, and we need to use them before the end of the year. We want to see your famous house, and frankly, to help you get your head around it. Maybe we can look into the local real estate market. Helped her clear her head. The words stung, as if my transformation from sleeping in a car to owning a house was a fantasy, not a real miracle. I don't think that's a good idea, Sarah. Why not? We're family. We need to know how you're doing, that you're safe. And honestly, Mom, what you've been saying lately worries us. It's not like you to cut off contact like this. You're right, I said softly. It's not like you. My old mom would have appreciated the concern, would have been alarmed by the suggestion that she was unstable. The mother who had moved for a week, spending beyond her means, just to make Sarah and Tom feel welcome, had slept in the car for 3 months while her daughter picked out paint colors for the nursery. What time are we arriving? I asked. Saturday afternoon. We'll stay at a hotel nearby, a nice place. Tom found a good place, at a discount through his company. Of course they'd stay at a hotel. Not because my house was lacking in space, Aunt Nora's living room was spacious and comfortable, but because staying would be an admission that this was my home, not a temporary state of affairs. They weren't there to share in my joy. They were there to fix me. Mom's picking us up from the airport, I heard myself say, calm. Great, Sarah exclaimed, relieved. You'll see. Stay with us for a while, and you'll remember what you're leaving behind. You'll understand that this California thing is just your way of dealing with sadness. And sadness can make people do strange things. After I hung up, I sat silently on Aunt Nora's porch for a long time, watching Helen Murray carefully pruning the plants in the garden next door. Finally, she seemed to sense the unusual silence from me. Helen put down the scissors and walked over to the low wooden fence that separated the 2 yards, her eyes worried. Is everything all right, Maggie? She asked, her voice low and warm like a gentle touch on the shoulder. You look like you've seen a ghost. My daughter is coming to visit, I replied. Helen's face lit up, her smile instantly. That's wonderful. You must be so happy. I should have been. But the emotion that quietly rose up inside me was not joy. I told Helen about the phone call with Sarah, about how she thought I needed to be healed, about Tom's calculating opinions, and the calculated plan to pull me back to reality. Helen listened intently, not interrupting. Only occasionally did she nod, her eyes knowing, as if my story were familiar to her. When I finished, she was silent for a moment, her hand still holding the pruning shears, hovering in midair. You know, Helen said finally, her voice as quiet as the wind through the trees. Your Aunt Nora had a similar experience when she first moved here. Her sister, your mother, I think, came to visit about 6 months after Nora and Dorothy bought the house. She came with her husband and a long list of do's and don'ts. I had never heard anyone talk about this before. And then? Well, they stayed for a few days, Helen said, her eyes fixed on a distant memory. During that time, they gave her all sorts of advice about how she should live, who she should be. They tried to convince her to go back to Michigan, find a good man, and build a proper life. Helen cut a wilted flower, more forcefully than necessary, as if she were plucking something from her mind. After that visit, Nora told me she learned something important. What was it? I asked, my heart racing. Helen smiled softly, slowly, as if a truth had been revealed. True love, she said, isn't trying to drag you back to who you used to be. True love is when someone appreciates the version of you that you're becoming. That afternoon, I drove to a hardware store in a neighboring town in Santa Barbara, a place where no one knew my name or had any past attached to me. I picked out new locks for the front and back doors, strong, hard-to-pick locks that were a silent statement of boundaries. The older man behind the counter, Walter Brooks, enthusiastically walked me through each step, from the type of screwdriver to use to how to align the hinges. Changing locks is one of the most meaningful things a woman can do, he said as he printed out the receipt. It makes a house feel like it belongs to you. That evening, I sat on the floor, carefully installing each new lock, clutching my Aunt Nora's old toolkit, following Mr. Brooks' carefully written instructions. The work required total concentration, each screw, each turn of the hand, a sense of mastery, as if I were building something lasting out of my own brokenness. Over the course of a few hours, the anxiety of Sarah and Tom's visit faded, melting into the clanking of metal and the smell of old wood. When I was done, I stood in the doorway, testing the key in the new lock, listening to the reassuring click, the sound of a door closing properly. On Saturday morning, I woke early, filled with a quiet but determined preparation. I picked out a blue dress I'd bought the week before, the first new outfit I'd bought in months of wearing the same old things. The dress fit me well, hugging me like a new layer of skin, making me feel poised, secure, like I really did belong to the house on Oakwood Drive. The Santa Barbara airport was a place of organized chaos. Holiday travelers rushing past each other, delayed flights leaving lines full of people waiting, and the air heavy with unease. I found Sarah and Tom in the baggage claim area, both looking tired and restless from their long flights. Sarah gave me a quick hug, then took a few steps back, as if to assess me from a safe distance, her eyes cold and searching, as if she were weighing an unknown item. You look different, Mom, she said, like you've been rested for a long time. Tom gave me a hug, too, loose and cursory, before launching into a series of complaints about the flight, the airport, and the horror stories he'd heard about California traffic. I just smiled politely, nodded, and walked them to the car. Not the beat-up Toyota Corolla they were used to, but the Subaru Outback I'd traded in the week before, a used but solid and reliable one. Nice car, Tom blurted, clearly surprised. The legacy must be bigger than Mom told Sarah. It was a casual remark, but it laid bare the nature of the trip. They hadn't come to worry about me. They'd come to assess what I'd inherited, to see how much of Aunt Nora's fortune would flow into their lives. Yeah, I said simply, repeating the vague explanation I'd given Sarah. On the way to the hotel, Sarah rattled off future plans, plans to buy a house, the good news of Tom's promotion, and dreams of expanding the family. Every word sounded rehearsed, like a speech that had been rehearsed many times, emphasizing what I had missed by staying in Santa Barbara. We found a beautiful house, Sarah said, her voice rising. 4 bedrooms, enough for a growing family, just a little tight on finances, even though Tom just got a raise. We're thinking about asking family for a down payment. And so the truth came out. The real purpose of this visit was neither anxiety nor obligation. It was wrapped in sentiment, but inside there was calculation and need. I pulled into the hotel parking lot, helped them unload their bags, and promised to come back to pick them up for dinner in 2 hours. As I drove away, I caught a glimpse in the rearview mirror. Sarah and Tom were standing close together, heads bowed, whispering something, clearly strategizing about dinner. But now I have my own strategy. I am no longer the woman who was once broke, grateful for 6 weeks of forced shelter. I am Maggie Thompson, someone with a roof over my head, a voice, and most of all, the right to say no. Dinner was held in the warm yellow light of a fancy restaurant in Santa Barbara, recommended by Tom himself. It was the kind of place that was expensive enough to prove they were financially okay, but also cleverly set the stage for a strategic proposal involving a dream house. Sarah wore a new dress, a pale blue that flattered her skin, a choice that was not accidental. Tom spent the first 20 minutes talking about his promotion, his voice as flat as if he were presenting a quarterly report to shareholders. I listened politely, with just the right amount of congratulations, while silently watching them stage the impeccably rehearsed drama of success. Admittedly, they played their parts well. A young, ambitious couple who just needed a little leverage from their families to realize their dreams. The house we're considering is a really good investment, Tom said, slicing into his steak with the confidence of a chessboard operator. Real estate prices in that area have gone up 35% in the last 5 years. With the baby on the way, we need the space, but we're also building a financial foundation for the future. Sounds good, I said, my tone neutral as if reviewing a loan application. Sarah leaned toward me, her eyes sparkling as if she were presenting something magical. I wish you could see it. It has a spacious kitchen with a beautiful island, and the master bedroom has a nursery nook, and the backyard is big enough for Lily to run around in. Tom added, his voice a little flippant. Perfect for extended visits. You can stay as long as you want. Extended visits, a gentle way of setting the bar. They invited me, yes, but not with open arms, but with conditions. A limited welcome, like most of what they had given me since I had set foot back in Santa Barbara. How much do we need? I asked, cutting through the icing on the cake. Their glances were quick enough that an inexperienced person might miss them, but 3 months of homelessness had taught me to read the smallest signals, the signals of someone who saw me as a problem to be solved. We were hoping you could give us about $55,000, maybe $65,000, Sarah said, as carefully as if she were treading on thin ice. Just for a deposit. Of course, we'll pay it back when Tom gets another raise. $65,000. The number rang in my head like a hollow tap in an empty room. It was more than I'd ever kept in my bank account in my entire life, before my Aunt Nora's inheritance. They'd calculated that I could spend, given my new circumstances, without asking my intentions or desires. It's a lot of money, I said, my voice slow and steady. But you have it, Tom replied, his eyes as calm as if stating the obvious. And you know, family helps each other. Family. They'd used that word like a wrench in every conversation since I'd arrived in Santa Barbara. A cleverly manipulated argument that made my heritage suddenly the default solution to their problems. Tell me about Lily, I said, deliberately diverting the conversation. How's she getting on with being a big sister? Sarah's expression softened instantly, her features relaxing like someone had opened a window in a stuffy room. Oh, she's so excited. She keeps rubbing my belly and talking to the baby. Yesterday, she said she'd teach me how to paint. For a brief moment, I saw Sarah in her early postpartum days, dark circles under her eyes from lack of sleep, but bright with happiness, brimming with pride as she held Lily in her arms. That was before Tom's promotions consumed her attention, before house hunting turned every weekend into a marathon, before I became a temporary inconvenience in their eyes. You miss her, I said, my voice low. Then go to Michigan, Sarah said immediately. That's what we were saying. Lily needs you, and the baby is coming. You're running away from the people who love you the most. Really? I asked, not taking my eyes off my drink. Because when you slept in the car, it didn't seem like you two needed her that much. Tom's jaw tightened, his fork stilling. That's not fair, Maggie. We left you for 6 weeks until I became a burden, I interrupted, my eyes fixed on him. Tom was silent for a moment, then chose his words carefully. You're not a burden, but you're going through a tough time. And sometimes what people need is professional support, not just from family. Professional support, as if losing my house was a sign of a mental health crisis rather than a logical consequence of the flood taking everything away and leaving me without any support. I'm not broken, Tom, I said, each word clear. I just didn't have a place to live, and now I do. Sarah chimed in, her voice suddenly a ray of sunshine. So let's move forward. You have this wonderful legacy. We have a wonderful opportunity with the house. Lily needs you in her life. Things are falling into place. I excused myself from the table, using the excuse of going to the bathroom, really to get some quiet time away from the carefully choreographed drama that Sarah and Tom were putting on. Reflected in the mirror was a woman who no longer had the haggard, hollow-cheeked look of poverty that she had had in the months before, but who was still groping her way back to confidence. I thought of Aunt Nora and Dorothy, women who had built their lives on the foundations of genuine love and respect. I remembered Helen, who had taken me in out of pure, unconditional kindness, and then the image of the new locks on the front door flashed through my mind, keys that only I possessed, symbols of my newly regained autonomy. When I returned to the table, Tom was showing Sarah something on his phone, maybe a photo of the house they were eyeing, or a mortgage spreadsheet where the numbers quietly proved that my legacy could make their dream come true. Tomorrow, before we fly back, we want to stop by to see how you're doing, Sarah said as I sat down. Maybe we'll stay the night, Tom chimed in, his voice light, to save on a hotel and to get a feel for the neighborhood. There it was, the assumption that my house was communal property, that my private space could be commandeered at any moment, all wrapped up in the guise of because we're family. Sorry, but that won't work, I said. Sarah frowned, surprised. Why not? Isn't the house comfortable enough? The house is perfectly livable, I said. I just want to keep my space. But we're family, Tom responded, as if that were the final, irrefutable argument. Yes, and you two have a hotel. The silence that followed was as sharp as a knife. I saw Sarah struggle with the fact that her mother, who had once slept in the car to avoid trouble, was now setting clear boundaries. You're being unreasonable, she said. We flew all the way here, and you won't let us stay the night. I flew here to appraise your estate and convince you to part with the money, I answered, without beating around the bush. Tom's face was red. That's not true. We're worried about you. You're not yourself. You're right, I said, my voice low. You're acting like someone who's just learned the difference between being loved and being used. Sarah's eyes were sparkling with tears. Real tears, I thought, but I was no longer naive enough to believe them completely. Why do you say that? You're my mother. I love you. You know I love you, but my love always comes with conditions that you're no longer willing to meet. What conditions? Sarah asked, her voice tight. That you're grateful for the slightest withdrawal of my attention. That you're not allowed to expect, not allowed to need, not allowed to demand. That all your needs are forced to take a back seat to my convenience. I reached into my wallet and paid for the meal. A small gesture, but a change. I was no longer dependent, no longer needing someone else to pay for me. I'll take you two back to the hotel, I said. The ride back to the hotel was a long, quiet one, broken only by Sarah's stifled sniffles and Tom's mumbles about Santa Barbara traffic. When I pulled up in front of the hotel, Sarah turned, her eyes a familiar look of hurt, an expression she'd mastered since her teens, half innocent, half soft accusation. Mom, don't let some aunt's house come between us. Don't let money mess up our family. Some aunt's house. The word swept away Aunt Nora's entire life, a woman who had quietly cultivated each brick, each tree, each window with all her heart, as if the place were an anonymous asset up for sale. It's not the money that changes us, Sarah, I replied, my voice calm. It just shows who we really are. Tom opened the door and walked out without saying anything, his shoulders stiff. Silence as a form of resistance. Sarah remained seated, her hands gripping the handlebars as a last strand of strength. "We'll stop by tomorrow morning before we go to the airport," she said, trying to keep her voice light. "Maybe Mom will change her mind overnight." "Maybe," I said. We both knew that wouldn't happen. That night I sat alone on Aunt Nora's porch, a cup of hot tea in my hand, watching the neighborhood slowly fall into quiet darkness. Helen's house was dark. She had said she would visit her daughter on the weekends, but the other windows were still ablaze with yellow light, where late meals and laughter echoed like the daily rhythm of life. My phone vibrated, a text from Sarah. "I love you, Mom. I hope you remember that." I typed a few words, then deleted, over and over again. I wanted to write, "I love you too," and that's why this all hurts so much. But I didn't send it. Instead, I put the phone down, walked into the house, and locked the door with a new lock. Cold metal that felt safe. Tomorrow would be the final moment, the final confrontation, where I would be forced to choose between my blood ties and the life I was trying to build. For the first time since Sarah called to tell me about the trip, I felt strong enough to choose. Those months in the car had taught me how to survive on a trickle of compassion, a makeshift roof, and a shorn pride. I had forgotten that I deserved more until Aunt Nora's legacy reminded me that there were people who understood the difference between pity and true love, between forced responsibility and unconditional care. This morning, Sarah and Tom would return, bringing with them the image of their mother they knew, a grateful, quiet, humble woman who would make sacrifices to maintain stability in their lives. But the woman waiting for them today was not the same person. They would meet a new Maggie Thompson, one who had learned to listen to herself and refuse to fit into a mold. I had learned that the deepest act of self-love was sometimes the courage to say no to anything that no longer fit my values. New locks had been changed, boundaries had been drawn, and this morning I would learn whether love could survive when it was no longer bound by expectations and benefits, or whether some relationships could only survive when one party gave up on themselves. I woke up early when the sky was tinged with the last purple of night and made coffee in Aunt Nora's old but warm kitchen. The first light filtered through the window, spreading over the dining table, the Santa Ynez Mountains rising in the mist like a whisper of a beginning. In a few hours they would arrive, no doubt bringing with them the hope of a final persuasion, a negotiation to bring the misguided mother back to reason and family responsibility. But this time I was not lost, not confused, not bewildered. For the first time in months, perhaps years, everything appeared to me with absolute clarity, as if the dust of the past had finally been washed away by the light of awakening. By 9 o'clock, I was ready, dressed as I had been the day before. My blue dress made me look composed, and I wore the pearl earrings that Aunt Nora had kept in an old velvet box. When I looked in the mirror, I saw a woman reflected back, no longer a passerby, but the rightful owner of the house on Oakwood Drive. Someone who was entering the next chapter of her life with confidence and without asking permission. Helen had returned from her daughter's house the night before, and I saw her busy in the kitchen, probably preparing breakfast as she usually did. Part of me wanted to speak up, to share the coming confrontation, to have a sympathetic presence by my side, but I knew there were some things no one else could do for me. This confrontation was mine. At exactly 9:47, a rental car pulled up in front of the gate. Sarah and Tom came down, looking tired, eyes dull, perhaps from the last few drinks at the planning table. Tom carried a briefcase, a detail both suspicious and comical. They were visiting their mother, not attending a hearing, and yet he needed the documents to support his carefully prepared arguments. I opened the door before they could knock, stepping out onto the porch instead of back inside. "Good morning," I said softly but firmly. "How's the hotel?" "Fine," Sarah said, her eyes flicking over my shoulder as if considering how to get past the doorman and inside. "Can we come in? We don't have much time before our flight," she said. "Actually, I think the porch is the perfect place to talk today." Tom's jaw clenched, his eyes irritably clear. "Maggie, it's freezing out here. Maybe only 4 degrees." 12 and sunny, I corrected, smiling. "Pretty nice for a December morning." I sat down in the wicker chair Aunt Nora had set out for the sunset. It was still there, as steadfast as I was. After a moment's hesitation, Sarah and Tom reluctantly took the chairs opposite. Both looked uncomfortable, though, as if they were trying to come to terms with a conversation taking place in territory they couldn't control. "Mom," Sarah said first, her voice soft and rehearsed, laced with a touch of false kindness. "After dinner last night, we talked it over and wanted to apologize if we reacted too strongly about the house. We understand that you're trying to adjust to your new situation." New situation? The way she phrased it made it sound as if inheriting a beautiful house in Santa Barbara and achieving financial independence were some kind of unforeseen event that needed intervention. "Actually, you're adjusting wonderfully," I said, suppressing a smirk. "Great," Tom interjected, opening his briefcase with exaggerated importance, like a lawyer entering a courtroom. "But we just wanted to make sure you were thinking about the big picture. The long term. At your age, optimizing your assets is key." I was 62, not 92, but in Tom's eyes, I seemed to have lost the ability to manage my own finances without his guidance. "What's the long-term plan?" I asked, my voice flat. Tom pulled out a thick stack of documents, property listings, mortgage interest calculators, investment return projections. He'd clearly prepared it as if he were pitching to a board of directors. "First of all, this house is too big for a single person to live in," he said. "The upkeep will eat into Mom's inheritance, not to mention the California state taxes." He shook his head, as if the state were conspiring against him personally. "You could sell the house, move to a smaller, more affordable place in Michigan, and still have hundreds of thousands left over to help our family grow." "Help our family grow our wealth," I said slowly, as if savoring the sarcasm. "Exactly," Sarah chimed in, leaning forward, her eyes sparkling with enthusiasm. "It means creating a financial foundation for generations. It's a waste if this money just sits there while we're struggling with the mortgage and the cost of raising a child." "Are you struggling, Sarah?" I asked, my gaze fixed on her. Sarah blinked. She was clearly unprepared for this direct question. "Well, not struggling exactly, but with the baby on the way and Tom's business expanding, we needed a springboard. We wanted a house not just for us, but to provide a good environment for Lily and the baby. Good schools, a safe neighborhood, plenty of room to grow up." "And you think Mom should be funding this cushion?" "We think you should be investing in the future of your grandchildren," Tom said, his voice honeyed but his meaning unpalatable. "Instead of clinging to a dead man's house and pretending you can start over at 62. The silence that followed Tom's words was so heavy that even the morning birds stopped chirping. Sarah's face was white, as if she had just realized that Tom had crossed a line they had probably agreed not to cross. "Tom," she whispered, her voice cracking. "That's not what—" "No, let him talk," I interrupted, my voice calm, but the anger inside me was churning like an undercurrent beneath the thin ice. "I want to hear more about this fake life you're living." Tom, mistaking my calm for a sign of compromise, leaned back in his chair triumphantly. and continued as if leading a strategy meeting. Look, Maggie, I understand. You've been through a rough time, the flood, the loss of your home, the trauma. It's all really painful. But you can't just run away to Santa Barbara and pretend to be someone else. You're an old lady from Michigan, not a California lady. This whole thing is an escape from the inevitable. And what is that reality? I asked, not taking my eyes off him. That you belong to your family, that your role is to support the next generation, not to play the role of a young divorcee. That was the cold truth behind their sweet facade. In Tom's narrow view, my worth was measured by my usefulness. Free babysitter, unpaid maid, and now a source of funding for their ambitions. The idea that I could have my own dreams, that I could aspire to happiness, was a concept so foreign to his world. I turned to look at Sarah. She bowed her head, her eyes fixed on our clasped hands, avoiding my gaze. She didn't object to Tom's words, just felt embarrassed that he had dared to say out loud what they had both been thinking. Do you know what's been on my mind? I said, my voice soft but ringing like a razor blade. 3 months ago, I would have agreed with you. I would have sold the house, moved back to Michigan, and given you whatever money you asked for. I was grateful that you still had a place in my life, even though I seemed like an unwanted burden. Mom, Sarah began, but I raised my hand, cutting her off. But then I realized something important. Can you guess what it was? No one answered. The room froze. I realized that there were people who genuinely invited me into their lives, and there were people who just tolerated me until my presence became a nuisance. I learned the difference between being loved and being used. I stood up, smoothing my skirt, feeling the weight of the keys in my pocket as a reminder of the control I had regained. Sarah, I love you. I love Lily, and I will love your unborn child. But I will not use my money to maintain a relationship in which I am an accessory. We don't consider you disposable, Sarah protested, finally looking up at me. We want you to be part of our family. That's what this conversation is all about. No, I said, not blinking. This conversation is about my need for money. If I really wanted you in my life, I wouldn't have made you sleep in the car for 3 months while I looked for a bigger house. Tom snorted, his voice mocking. The car again. You make it sound like we're kicking you out. You're not kicking me out, I said slowly. You just made it clear to me that I wasn't welcome there. Tom paused, as if realizing he'd revealed part of the truth he'd been trying to hide. I could guess the words he was going to say next. Pitiful, annoying, burdensome. What was Mom to you, Tom? I asked, not taking my eyes off him. She was going through something we didn't know how to handle. Sarah interrupted, her voice urgent. We thought giving her some space would help her get over it. And now she's got over it, I said. It's clear to me that you see your legacy as a solution to your problems, not a reward for what you sacrificed. I stepped out onto the porch, looking out over the neighborhood where Aunt Nora and Dorothy had built a life of love. On the opposite lawn, Helen was watering the wildflowers along the fence, smiling and waving when she saw me. I waved back, feeling a sudden sense of peace, a simple joy from someone who expected nothing but kindness. So, what now? Sarah asked, and for the first time I heard undisguised fear in her voice. I'll go back to Michigan, I said, my eyes still on the swaying trees. I'll find a house within Tom's means. I'll raise my children and make a life for myself without you. And us? Sarah's voice trailed off into the distance. What will happen to us? I turned to look at her, not the woman who had orchestrated this meeting with such cunning, but the child who had once snuggled into my arms on stormy nights, seeking only comfort. That depends on whether you can love your mother without demanding that she be grateful for it. Tom began to gather up his papers, his face flushed, anger and bitterness rising like a broken dam. Nonsense, he snapped. You're abandoning your family for money. I'm not abandoning anything, Tom, I said, my voice even and firm. I'm just refusing to continue paying for an affection that should have come freely. Fine, he snapped, rising from his chair. But when this California dream is shattered, leaving you alone with your so-called self-respect, don't come crying to us. I've been lonely, I said, almost whispering, and it wasn't as bad as you think. Sarah stood up more slowly, tears streaming silently down her cheeks. For a fragile moment, I thought she was going to apologize, admit what they'd tried to do with this visit. Instead, she just wiped her eyes, holding her head high with the familiar defensiveness I'd seen in that child long ago, a kind of dignity masquerading as pride. I hope you're happy, she said, her voice shaking but not breaking. You're finding it, I said. I stayed on the porch, watching them load the rental car. As it pulled out of the driveway, Sarah glanced back at me one last time, her eyes trying to say something that hadn't quite formed yet. Tom didn't. He just stared straight ahead, as if he were already plotting his next move. As Sarah and Tom's rental car disappeared around the corner, I returned to the old wicker chair on the porch, where Aunt Nora had sat, sipping tea and watching the sunset. I pulled out my phone, and the screen showed 15 missed calls and 38 text messages. None of them made me hesitate. I deleted them all, not opening them. Instead, I scrolled down my contacts, stopping at James Carter, the lawyer whose number I'd saved for years but never called. He picked up on the second ring. "Maggie, are you okay?" "I'm fine, thank you," I said, my voice soft but clear. "I want to discuss amending the will." There was a short pause. "Of course. What would you like to change?" "I want to establish a scholarship fund for women over 50 who are rebuilding their lives after losing everything. And I want to leave this house to someone who will appreciate the legacy that Aunt Nora and Dorothy created." "I'll do the paperwork for you," he said. "Have you chosen a beneficiary?" I looked over at Helen. She was pruning the roses with the care of someone who knows that beauty must be nurtured from the roots. "Yes," I said softly. "I think I've chosen the right person." That evening, I called the book club Helen had told me about and asked to join. Laura Simmons answered, her voice warm and welcoming. "Next month, we're reading Late Bloomers," she said, "stories about women finding their strength in their twilight years. I think you'll see yourself in them." As the sun set behind the Santa Ynez Mountains, I sat alone on the porch, leafing through my Aunt Nora's old book about women who discovered that the second half of life could be entirely new, bright and unexpected. The phone lay silent beside me, no frantic calls from Sarah, no text messages laden with guilt and obligation. In that silence, I found freedom. Tomorrow, I would start planning for that scholarship. I would tend a few flower beds in the garden, petal by petal. I would host a reading in the living room, where the sunset streamed through my mother's wool blanket. I would live a life of my own choosing, surrounded by people who saw my presence as a blessing, not a burden. If Sarah and Tom could learn to love unconditionally without asking for anything in return, they would always have a place in this new life. If not, I would be fine. The woman who had slept in her car for 3 months was gone. In its place was Maggie, who had regained her dignity, something that, once lost, could be more precious when found than any approval from her family. The doors were locked, the will was changed, and I was, finally, really home.